Hello, welcome to the Artistic Spirit podcast. And today I'm here with Jon Richter, writer of crime thrillers, horror, sci-fi, and fantasy books, and co-host of the Dark Natter and hosts in the Shell podcast. So welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
So my first question is, you've been published by a variety of publishers, both big and small, and have also self-published. Can you share some of the key differences in your experiences with these different publishing routes, and what advice would you have to give to someone who is trying to decide which path to take?
It's a really good question. And yeah, it's my 10th book comes out next year in 2024, which is my first ever fantasy novel. It's a book that's going to be called Scarred. And as you say, yeah, I've written in a few different genres: science fiction, horror, sort of more kind of present day crime, and sometimes kind of mashups of the different types. So what I've found is, because if you write in different genres, some publishers just won't publish certain genres and they will publish others. So a publisher I've worked with quite a number of times is Bloodhound Books, who are great, and I've had a really good experience with them. But they predominantly publish crime thrillers. So when I'm sort of like, I've written a weird fantasy book, do you want this? But understandably, they were kind of, well, no, because we don't publish those. So I found myself having to kind of sort of sell books to, or submit them to different publishers over the years. So I've ended up working with quite a few different ones, and I also, with some of my short horror fiction. That I think is particularly difficult to find publishers for kind of horror anthologies. I think what you tend to find is you're better off kind of submitting them individually to sort of magazines and that kind of thing. And that probably leads a little bit into the answer. So with the short horror stuff, I was just really proud of those few collections, and I was like, I like this. I don't care if they're a bit weird and not particularly commercially viable. I just want to get them out there. And obviously then self-publishing is a really viable route. So obviously Amazon Kindle, KDP, fantastic platform, really. That it's improved even in the sort of 10 years that I've been a published author. You can get hardback books now. And obviously you've got that kind of complete creative control over the title of the book, the cover design, everything. And that's all really, really rewarding and satisfying. And you do feel like you've kind of got a thing that's yours and you've made it. I think I've got a copy of my most recent horror anthology. I'll just waft it on the screen for those in video form. So this was Dark Fiction, and it's there's a creepy kind of tentacled house on the cover, and it's just the sort of thing that you could probably only get away with if you sort of commissioned it yourself. Now the flip side of self-publishing is, I think, probably two big pieces of advice. I would say one is, you've got to invest the time in the editing and the proofreading processes. So don't think you can save money by, I'll just proofread it myself, I'm really good at spelling and grammar, because you'll miss loads. And depending on whether you've benefit from working with a structural editor or a copy editor, again, I'd suggest that if you err on the side of, oh no, I don't need one, it's fine, it quite possibly isn't. And what you wouldn't want is to put something out there that's riddled with mistakes or typos or continuity errors. At the very least, you might want to use a sort of beta reader to give the thing, give you some honest feedback. And as kind of brutal as it sounds, you won't get honest feedback from your friends and family. So if my mum loves all my books, but she probably would, even if they were completely unintelligible scroll. So you've got to be quite disciplined, I think, if you're not working with a publisher, to still go through the rigorous kind of editing process and make sure the thing you're putting out is as good as it can be, because a lot of readers will just be turned off by something that's badly punctuated, has got a grammatical error in the first sentence, all that kind of stuff. Probably linked to that, actually, just on the topic of cover art, you do see some self-published books that have quite unprofessional looking covers. And again, it's kind of, I don't want to sound sort of judgmental. People often put a lot of their heart and soul into these designs, and some of them you see are fantastic, and it's all very subjective. But sometimes you can sort of tell, maybe it's like the font isn't quite the right choice, or it just doesn't quite work as an image. And again, unfortunately, people will just not buy the book if they don't like the cover. It's one of the only things they can really base the decision on. So got to get lots of feedback, put lots of effort in on those fronts. What I would say is, even if you do all those things and you think you've got a really good book with a great cover and a good name and it's perfectly professionally edited, you probably still won't sell many copies. And that's the kind of, I keep using this word brutal for some reason, the brutal reality of self-publishing is you are a kind of drop in an ocean, you're competing with lots and lots of other writers, everyone's desperately trying to sell their stuff on, I'm still going to call it Twitter. At the time of speaking, it is currently called something else, but no one likes, or Facebook or whatever the platforms are. And certainly that's another big aspect of being a writer is if you want to sell books, you will have to engage with those kind of marketing processes. Even if, like me, if you're really not very good at them and don't like doing them, which is definitely part of my downfall. So I think, and again, if you self-publish a book and then don't market it, you will literally sell zero. So if you're in it, I'd probably say if you're in it for the sales, you've got to be really prepared to be almost like a full-time professional marketer, or don't self-publish. So I think self-publishing is because you want your stuff out there in the world, because you just, for the love of the art, which is great, and that is a noble aim, or you're going to really, really hammer it almost like a small business in terms of promotion. So that probably covers off the kind of self-published bit. Maybe moving on to kind of more traditionally published. So I've worked with a few different indie publishers. I mentioned Bloodhound. My fantasy novel's being published by Collective Inc. They are called. I think that the imprint's called. I think it's called Rangfire Books. I should know that, and I don't because it's a new different name. I'll check that. And I've also worked with TCK Publishing. And my debut crime thriller was actually published by HarperCollins on the digital only label. So that's only available on Kindle. It doesn't exist in sort of paper form. So big publisher and some smaller ones. And I think what you find there is all that stuff I talked about before about kind of editing, cover design, that will be provided to you. You know, if it's a good publisher, you know, it's all in the contract. Those services will be provided. What I would say is, you'll get some publishers who will, you know, oh, we have different contractual offers, and some of them we want you to pay us for those services. And I'd suggest if that's the case, I probably wouldn't bother. My view would be if the publisher isn't prepared to sort of back your book, you know, to an extent, you may as well just self-publish it and pay for those things yourself. I'm not really convinced there's much benefit to working with a publisher who wants to charge for those kind of services. So that you do get these sort of, this is a horrible word, like vanity publishers, and it's kind of like, oh, give us $2,000 and we'll publish your book for you. And you kind of think, well, you know, what's the point? So I think if you've got a good publisher, it's a proper, you know, they are going to take a share of a big chunk of all the sales, and you get a royalties percentage at the end. You know, check in with other writers and other people. Does the contract offer seem reasonable? Let's assume that's what you've got. You'll then get all the copy editing, proofreading all done for free. Brilliant. The downside is sometimes they'll have it, you might not agree with some of the stuff they say. So you'll find, I've had books in the past where the title has not necessarily been one I've been particularly happy with. And again, it's very subjective, and these people are experts in book sales and promotion. So sometimes maybe in terms of sort of commercial viability, they know best. But I've also found that isn't necessarily the case. So I think what I've learned as I've got a bit more confidence and experienced is it's okay to push back. You know, if your editor says, oh, I really hate the ending and I don't like that character, and I think you should merge this character with this character, it is okay for you to say, no, I feel quite strongly that doesn't work. Here's why. I think the key bit is that you don't take it personally. You don't be unprofessional. You don't sort of sulk because someone's dared to challenge your, you know, your piece of work. I think if somebody says, oh, have you thought about this? And you're able to say, yes, but here's why I don't think that's a good idea. Then that should be a very constructive, helpful kind of dialogue. I get one sort of final tip that springs to mind is the proofread, right? So publishers don't want the writer to see the final version after the proofread, because I think at that point it's done now. We don't want to spend, you know, lots and lots of their time going round and round endless revisions. What you do get with some slightly overzealous proofreaders is things like, in the interests of a technically more correct sentence, they've kind of completely lost the rhythm, or they've subbed in a word that just doesn't work and just kind of ruins the sort of mood you were going for. Or the worst one is when you've got deliberate typos or mistakes or odd spellings or unusual names. Sometimes the proofreader will then correct those, which obviously makes them wrong, not correct. So I would say always try and see the final version before it's out and it's too late. because you'll always find something, I think.
Yeah, did you have an agent, and could you kind of like walk through the process from start to end for traditional publishing?
Of course. Now, I don't have an agent. I'll tell you what my experience with agents has been, which is interesting. Is whenever I've had a book and submitted it to a few publishers, I've usually had a good sort of responsive response, if that makes sense. So you usually hear back relatively quickly. Obviously, some publishers it's a straight no. Sometimes it might be a oh, we're not sure. Send us a few more chapters, and then a no. And luckily for me, everything I've written has ultimately ended up with a yes, apart from some of the short horror stuff, which is great. When I've submitted to agents, I've always had either a negative response on a few occasions or just no reply. So I've found agents to just be quite unresponsive to submissions. I think the other challenge I've got that other writers probably potentially don't have is, again, it's the multi-genre thing. Mm-hmm. So what you tend to find is an agent will be an agent who represents science fiction writers or crime writers or fantasy writers, but they don't necessarily do a lot of sort of crossover multi-genre stuff. So now the upside of not having an agent is obviously that's one less person to share a cut of your earnings with. I think the downside is I think an agent can be really invaluable in helping you navigate that whole kind of marketing minefield and just giving you good advice on events you might want to attend and all that kind of stuff. So I sometimes think I do miss out a little bit by not having one of those. Now, having said that, you can obviously have that kind of conversation with your publisher. So just to kind of step through the process that has worked for me, it's basically just write a book speculatively, and then it's finished and you're happy with it. And you Google which publishers there are for that type of genre, big, small. Make sure you read their submissions guidelines. So don't just chuck out the same 3 chapters to everyone, because what you might find is one publisher might want the whole manuscript straight away. Another publisher might want the first X number of words. And I think if you don't, and sometimes in certain formats, so, double line spacing in font size 12 Times New Roman. And so if you don't send it in the right format, it's a bit like having an error on your CV, for a job application. It's just an unnecessary mistake. So make sure you actually take the time to submit in line with the guidelines. Like keep a record, a little spreadsheet or a list or whatever of who you've submitted to, and then just see what kind of response you get. If things go according to plan, you'll get someone who says, "We really like the book. This is great. Can you send us the whole thing?" If maybe they've only read the first 3 chapters, and ultimately, if you are successful, you'll be offered a contract. And that's obviously something you do need to read it before you sign it. Again, make sure there's no hidden charges, make sure there's no sort of weirdly low royalties percentages and that kind of thing. But once don't feel you're rushed into it, just because they've sent you the contract on 11 a.m. on a Thursday, they're not expecting you to sign it by 10 past 11. So you've got time to sort of consult with any friends or family you want to. And ultimately, you'll kind of sign the dotted line, and then you're away. What you'll sort of commit to in the contract is going through that editing process. Now, it does get a bit murky if you really fell out about an editing decision. It depends on the wording of the contract, but I think they sort of reserve the right to rescind the offer if you don't agree to certain edits. But it's worth checking. It's not always quite as strict as that. What they do often have very strict control of is the book's title. So you basically won't get a say in that. If they don't like your title, it'll be something else. But again, usually it's a constructive dialogue. They'll say, "Oh, we're not that keen on the title. Have you got any other ideas?" You'll send them 3 or 4 more and they'll say, "Oh yeah, we like that one. That'll do." So usually it doesn't feel this kind of adversarial relationship. It usually feels very kind of supportive. And then, at the end of that kind of journey is you'll know your release date. It's been up for pre-order. You've done your tweeting and Facebook and all your other shameless self-promotion, ready for launch day, and then it's out. And then I suppose the most satisfying bit of being a writer is seeing the kind of reviews come in. So and obviously you'll always get 1 or 2 rough ones, and you'll be motivated to dwell on those. And someone gave me a 1-star review. It's the end of the world. But actually, when you get a review or some comments or feedback from someone who's enjoyed your book, it's fantastic. Very, very rewarding.
That's amazing. So reflecting on your writing career since your first novel in 2017, can you share a significant moment or turning point that had a profound impact on your writing style or approach?
Oh, that's a good question. Think I think as I've got let's have a think. What has changed my writing style or approach? I value sort of innovation and originality. So I think the thing that I've found motivates me to write is if I think I've had a dead good idea, something cool and different that's never been done before. And I think although I've probably learned sadly, that sort of thing isn't necessarily going to drive the big sales. I think what often sells is not always, of course, but sometimes is quite formulaic stuff. You know, people like a certain genre and they want to buy books that are clearly of that genre. Oh, here's the cover. That looks like a crime thriller. I'm going to read a crime thriller. But what I have learned is people who do enjoy the more peculiar narratives, they do seem to really like it because they like the same thing. They like that it's a bit different. Oh, this book is not like other books in this genre, and they'll recommend it to their fellow readers and so on. So yeah, maybe it's not been so much a big change. It's been I've sort of learned that if you write a bit outside of the box, it maybe can make your stuff harder to be big best selling, but you will find an audience and people will appreciate it, which is great.
Yeah, and on that topic, in your opinion, what elements or themes are essential for crafting an effective dark story that resonates with readers and viewers?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there's a piece around. So sometimes it's sort of dark. I use this label dark fiction to sort of encompass quite a few different genres. But if you talk, let's say, for crime, science fiction, fantasy, often those genres will have commonality in terms of, there's a degree of violence. There'll probably be, some sort of conflict in there. If it's a crime thriller, there's likely to be at least one, if not several, gruesome murders. And these are the things that weirdos like me like reading about and writing about, which is great. But I think a thing to avoid is overloading your. I think my point is probably pacing is the key. So I think if you write a narrative that's just packed with conflict, action, violence, gore, and it just very rapidly just becomes a completely kind of draining experience. It's a bit like if you watched a horror movie and there was a jump scare every 2 minutes for the entire movie. By the end of it, you're just kind of yawning and falling asleep, really. So the most effective horror movies, the most effective crime thrillers, the most effective any form of fiction, really, I think are the ones that are able to be quite disciplined with pace. So I think, now that's not to say your book needs to start slowly. And actually, obviously, there's a school of thought that says your book needs to start with a bang and there needs to be a really punchy opening chapter to hook people in, which I think is not always necessary, but can be effective. You certainly, if nothing else, you're writing a murder novel, a murder mystery thriller, it probably does make sense to start with the central murder and the discovery of the body. That is a sensible place to kind of start the story, I think. But it also pays to be original, so don't feel you have to stick to that rule. But again, I think if you've opened with a bang, your chapter 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 don't all also have to have a bang. Otherwise, you're going to have this kind of unsustainable sort of crescendo, really. So I think you've got to be disciplined with pacing. If you are going to use a bit of gruesome stuff or violence, please use it sparingly. Don't sort of overwhelm the reader with that stuff, because I just don't think, unless it, where it's needed in the story, you want to have it in there. But as soon as it feels a bit gratuitous, I just think it loses its impact. And I guess I'm focusing a lot there on kind of plot and what happens in the book. The thing that countless fans of literature will always bang on about is characters. So people love good, strong characters. And often, if you've actually managed to craft a really good, strong character or set of characters, to an extent, your story starts to almost write itself, because it's almost, well, put these 4 people in a room and in this situation and let's see what happens. And then you kind of know what they would do and how they would react without even having to plan it out. So that's great too.
As a multi-genre writer, do you feel that there's certain things that are in every genre, kind of like elements to your writing or your approach or style, that you keep consistent?
That is a good question. Yes, I think so. So I think you write your voice as a writer probably is a bit of a function of just yourself and your own style. And I think if you dabble in different genres, you probably find there's still that common thread of how you express yourself and the sort of structure and so forth. Um, yeah, I think maybe I probably do try to approach the projects in the same way, establish the characters, establish the setting, establish the central kind of conflict or whatever's driving this, sort of introducing these elements in what's hopefully an interesting way. And you do like to spread in, you've got little hooks. So you want each chapter to close with something significant, whether it's a little bit of a cliffhanger or whether it's a revelation or whether it's something a bit more melancholy and haunting or a little kind of sad moment. So I do maybe, yeah, I think all my stuff I probably write with the idea of a reader who's going to pick it up and read one chapter and then put it down again in mind.
I love that. Can you share some insights into your writing process and how you develop your stories? And also, if you feel like your process is different from other writers because it's multi-genre.
Yes, yeah, no, certainly. And I think I'm a bit peculiar in this regard, in how I write, because I don't write a first draft and then go back and edit it and then go back and edit it again. I edit as I go. So it tends to be, write a few thousand words for the day. I like to set myself a word count target. So it might be like, right, feels like a good day today. Let's do 5,000 words. Come on. And so you get to your word count limit and then, right, that's enough. I'm mentally drained. I'm going to go and drink some beer and watch TV or whatever it is. And then the next time I come back to write, I'll start by rereading and editing the thing I wrote yesterday. And sometimes that can be quite demoralizing because sometimes it's complete garbage. And other times you're like, oh, this was pretty good. But just get through that. And then still some more new words on the end of it. So you've got this kind of, you're constantly going back over the last few thousand words as well as writing the next few thousand. And what that means is by the end of the draft, it's basically done. And I usually find I don't get too much editorial changes from the sort of editors. So it's, I guess I'm taking that to mean I'm sending stuff in that's in pretty good shape. And I am led to believe this is quite peculiar and not how anyone else does it, basically. The problem, I think, with my approach is it does usually end up where you kind of, it's done and it's finished and I've kind of had enough of it now. So you're not really motivated to go back over it multiple times because you kind of, this is it. And if I change that bit, then it's going to affect this bit. So maybe I would benefit from forcing myself to do that kind of second draft, third draft, but it just doesn't really work for me in that way. But I think that, so what's my advice? My advice is probably don't follow my approach because I'm odd. Do what all the other writers tell you is a good idea. And what they would say is, write completely unfiltered, no editing at all, get your thing first draft done, and then go back and revisit. And I guess the real answer is just do whatever works for you. I think the really, really important piece of advice is just do write, though. So if the one thing above all else that will stop you from writing a book is if you don't actually write a book. So you've got to kind of quite ruthlessly park yourself in front of your laptop and get writing. And, even if you set yourself a more modest word count target, 500 words a day is still enough to get you a book written at the end of a year or what, whereas 0 words, 0 books. So there is a thing about just trying to battle the sort of procrastination and all the other urges you get to sort of put it off sometimes.
How do you battle procrastination?
I think it's just the targets thing. So I think it's like, if tomorrow is a designated writing day for me, and again, it might be a designated writing morning or a designated writing hour, and obviously your target is then flexed to match that. But you've got to get to that word count, sort of come hell or high water. So it's once that's in your head, as that's a hard commitment, I have to do this today. then in a way you sort of don't leave yourself any choice or wiggle room. Otherwise, before you know it, it's like, oh, I could do with putting a wash on, and maybe I should iron all my shirts, and or nip to the shop for some milk. And there's so many ways you can find excuses not to write.
Yeah. What is the frequency of your targets? Like, is it daily? Do you like set things like kind of like a week you'll write, a week you'll
Yeah,
take
no,
off?
that's a good question. So the way I live is I tend to do it. I work as an accountant in my real life day job, and I tend to do interim jobs. So I work for 6, 12, 18 months in a sort of finance role, and that's like put my other face on and do a completely different job. And then I'll take little stints off in between jobs. So I might be, 3 months, let's say. And it's coincidentally, actually, yesterday was my last day at my most recent job. So as of, today's a Friday, so I've given myself a bit of an easy one today. But as of Monday, I'm taking sort of 3 months out to write another novel. This one's going to be a kind of horror thing that I've been cooking up for a while. We'll see how that goes. And so from Monday, it's like, right, you've got to do 5,000 words a day is usually what I work towards. I might be a little bit lenient with myself in the first few days just to get myself back on the straight and narrow again. But yeah, so it is a daily target or like a session target, if that makes sense. Because I think the danger for a weekly target is you just won't write enough, and then it'll get to the last day of the week and suddenly, okay, I have to write 26,000 words today to catch up. But again, it will be different for different people.
Yeah. So on that topic, how gentle are you with yourself if you don't hit a target?
I'm finding myself giving lots of "don't do what I do" advice. So I am really, really horrible to myself, beat myself up,
Oh, no.
absolutely drowning in guilt if I don't hit these targets. So
no.
it's not necessarily the right way to work. No, I've exaggerated there for comic effect. I do treat them as targets. So I do. It is. I think it's totally right and fine to say if something comes up, certainly if there's a emergency plumbing problem in your home or whatever it is, certainly there are going to be days when you can't hit what you thought you were going to do, and that's totally fine. I think what you do need to do though is be fairly honest with yourself, or completely honest with yourself, because I think there is a difference between one day where you take it a bit easy versus you've kind of done 3 or 4 days where you've taken it a bit easy. And again, it's totally up to people, whatever they choose to do with their lives, because it's a very precious period of time. But if you want to be a writer, I think there is a degree of it's a job, and part of the job is writing. I think the bit I need to be more rigorous about, or ruthless myself, is the marketing. And I think other writers are probably very good, similar principle really, to almost be like, right, this morning is social media morning, and they'll be on all the different platforms and promotion and all that stuff. And I'm a lot less sort of good at that, sadly.
So switching gears, one of your favorite topics to explore in fiction is the rise of AI and its implications for humanity. What fascinates you most about this theme, and how do you incorporate it into your work?
Oh, that's it. Wow. Yes, that is a good switching gears question. I am indeed have long been fascinated with that story. And of course, it's gone from, even just a few years ago, if you start talking about sort of robots and AI, most people would sort of glaze over a bit and be like, oh, this is a bit of a weird crackpot topic and no one really cares about this. And
I love this topic. I have more questions about it.
Good, that's good. You're not one of the glazed over people. But it used to be kind of, oh no, not at the forefront of people's minds, because it sounded like science fiction stuff that was just in the distant future. Suddenly it's mainstream news, it's all over the TV. We've got the writers' strike in America just ended, and all that kind of stuff. So it feels like it's kind of happening now, the thing. And of course it is exactly as was kind of predicted in a lot of these movies and books. It's very kind of divisive and controversial, because obviously AI, robots, etc., will, in theory, take away jobs from humans, and that is a really controversial, difficult subject. Huge question for society to grapple with. People have got lots of different views on how that's going to pan out. One end of the spectrum, you've got people who say, oh, we've had all these so-called revolutions before, and they'll just be new different jobs, and there'll always be jobs for people. I'm probably at the other end of the spectrum where I don't think there will be. So I think that society will have to completely transform, because I think capitalism drives us in that way. So I think it's, you know, we live in a capitalist society. Capitalism is all about companies making profit. Companies are, it's not, in a way, it's not their fault. It's just how we have structured things, that these organizations have to drive out costs, drive down costs, increase the bottom line. That's how our system works, that we're all sort of bought into. So if given an opportunity, hey, you could employ a person, but you could use this AI to do it for you, they will pick the AI, because that's how capitalism works. And I think once you get to a tipping point where there's enough capability, let's say in AI world, driverless cars, you know, journalists, you know, whatever the skill set is, then I think you get to a point where the majority of people aren't needed in the workforce, because you can just get machines to do it. And that sounds really bad and terrifying. I guess if you look at it through another lens, if we can get the reshaping of society right, maybe it doesn't need to be. Maybe we could all, instead of being defined by our jobs, we could define by our creative projects or our family relationships or how caring and nice people we are. So I think there's opportunities there. Now, that's the kind of highbrow bit of the AI discussion. What also appeals to me, though, is like robots and computers are just dead cool. So it's like I've been brought up on this diet of, you know, like Alien with the creepy Ash, the medical robot guy, you know, head falls off halfway through the film. And you've got, you know, 2001, A Space Odyssey with HAL. So this idea of like the sinister robot, and not just a sinister robot, you've also got, you know, like the sort of the sad robot, like, I don't know, Crichton in Red Dwarf, and he's just sort of so diligently subservient that, so I just have grown up with these characters since the age of none, and I'm 40, so 40 years of kind of fascinating robots on TV and in films and in books, and I just love them. So I sort of, I think I'm just, I really want to explore what the future might look like, where these things are more prevalent in our lives. Again, trying to come up with interesting alternate angles on it than some of the more obvious kind of tropes. And I'm just kind of excited to see it happen in real life. I think the day that there's a sort of, you know, like just a little mobile robotic sort of pet that you can have a chat with, whether it's got Chat GPT or whatever, you know, other language models are available. I think that day when I get to buy one of them and I've got my little robot helper in the room, you know, go make me a cup of tea, that I'll feel like it's fine. That's it. The future has happened, and I think it'll be quite fun.
Yeah, going deeper into that topic, do you see it as a force for good, evil, or something more complex? And how has your perspective on AI evolved through your writing?
Yeah, no, really great question. I think I don't see AI and technology, and this sounds like a really easy thing. This is what they all say, isn't it? They say, oh, well, it's just a tool and it's not evil, inherently evil. It's about the people who use it. And that's a bit like saying, I don't know, you know, an atomic bomb is just a tool. Obviously, it's inherently problematic if the thing is designed to cause destruction. I think AI is a bit more complex because it could certainly help solve a lot of our problems. And everything I say now is just going to be incredibly controversial. But take the car, you know, driverless cars. I do think the world will be better when humans don't drive, because I think we're dangerous. We kill each other in car crashes all the time. The machines are demonstrably better at it. Some people won't like that and won't agree, but yes, it's true though. So I think that there are loads of benefits that do already come from our kind of, you know, increasingly automated world. But we touched on the capitalism before. It's all profit motivated. That's how it is. And that inevitably is going to lead to things being misused or used in the wrong way or used in sort of less responsible moral ways. So it all needs careful kind of monitoring and government oversight and all those kind of things. But yes, I'm not a complete sort of doom merchant about this stuff. I'm still quite excited by it. I think what has caught me by surprise, I guess, is the AI in a creative sense. So I don't think anybody thought we'd be in a world where AIs were doing all the painting and all the books. You know, that was supposed to be the one bit we could keep. And I do think that is problematic. I've had to. So I think if you'd have asked me even a couple of years ago, like, oh, do you like AI paintings? I'd have been like, yeah, they're really cool and weird. I love them. The Ace, I'd have one of them on my wall. Whereas when you then, as a writer, you start to see AI written books, or oh, this book was written with the assistance of ChatGPT, and you just think, well, I mean, anybody can do that, can't they? Anyone can just type into ChatGPT, please write me a book about this, and then it does, and then you sort of say it's yours. So, and then you start to see it from the perspective of those other artists. So, for example, a painter. So I think it is problematic if creative pursuits are going to be sort of outsourced, but equally, we do as artists have to work within that world. There's no point just complaining about it. So, for example, if it is now possible to get ChatGPT to write a formulaic crime thriller, well, maybe writers need to write less formulaic crime thrillers then, and write more interesting and original ones that aren't just full of sort of by the numbers, tick the box tropes. So maybe it could, in a way, sort of push us artistically to do better things. But we're back again to that. It's this big societal shift that we're going through, and it'll be really fascinating to see where it ends up.
Yeah, I recently saw an interview with Lex Friedman and Mark Zuckerberg, and they had like VR headsets on, and it like showed like the output. They got like scans done for like photorealistic images of themselves, like 3D models, and it was just so interesting. So like the actual recording of it, they showed like them like occasionally with the headset on. And then I don't know, there was like a third one. I guess that was like the modeling of it. And then there was like the output, and it was like them, just like their faces and like their expressions. And it was just so interesting to see. And it looked like they were in the same room together, but they weren't. And I guess it's like more efficient than like just like producing video, because it's like animated, and it's different from like kind of like avatars because it's photorealistic. So it's just so interesting.
And there's all this stuff that we haven't even thought of. There'll be,
Yes.
and everything's got this kind of double edge to it. Like if you, I remember watching Terminator Salvation in the cinema years and years ago when that came out, which is not particularly well regarded Terminator movie, but I quite enjoyed that one. And what I didn't know, spoilers for Terminator Salvation, is towards the end. So Arnie is not in that movie. I think it's the only Terminator movie that Schwarzenegger isn't in as an actor. But towards the end, a Terminator appears, and it's CGI'd. It's a CGI representation of Schwarzenegger, but in his younger days, which obviously you couldn't recapture now because he's an older man. And I was like almost cheering in the cinema, like, oh, this is amazing! Look at this! It's young Arnie's been brought back by technology. This is cool. But then there's also this moral debate about, but is it cool to bring back actors who are, for example, who are deceased? Do we want to be watching movies with actors who are dead? Well, but if their estate has kind of approved it and their family are getting money out of it, then maybe that's okay. But it still seems a bit weird. So we've just all these kind of moral dilemmas we still need to work through. Ironically, as I'm talking to you about technology, my own camera has frozen. So hopefully
Yeah, I was wondering if that
that'll
was
come
on
back
my end.
soon.
But it's good. I can hear your audio, and it's still a picture of you, so it's
Pulling a
it seems
slightly
like
weird
AI has
face.
taken over.
Could be worse. It could be worse. I've been frozen in worse positions than that on some Zoom calls at work.
Yeah, if you want, sometimes turning your camera off and then turning it back on just on the Zoom feature helps. But I feel like this is the most appropriate time for that to ever happen. And I do have another question. This is going to be the final question on AI, but can you recommend any books, movies, or other works that have inspired or influenced your exploration of AI related themes in your fiction?
Oh, that's a great question. And I mentioned a few movies already there with the kind of the sort of creepy AIs in them, like Alien and 2001: A Space Odyssey. There are absolutely loads. There's so many, and I can't believe I'm struggling to dust any off. Here's one that springs to mind: a short story called "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream" by Harlan Ellison. That interestingly, he got a credit at the end of the first Terminator movie, because he claims they sort of ripped Skynet off his short story, and James Cameron doesn't agree and says that's wrong, but they settled and gave him this writing credit. And the AI in that story is called AM, the Allied Master Computer. And the reason I like that character, like is the wrong word, he's absolutely horrible, but I like him as a character because, unlike the usual portrayal of robots and machines in films and books, they're always portrayed as these very, very cold, ruthless calculation engines. And if they do something bad, it's because they have made this ruthless decision to, we will wipe out humanity, but it's for the good of the planet. And that's an interesting story as well. Am is not like that. He is just a sadist who hates humans. He despises the people that have made him, and he wipes us out and tortures us for fun because he hates us. And I just thought that was a kind of fascinating, different take on that kind of stereotypical character of the kind of evil AI. But yeah, you can find that short story online, I think, and I'm sure it's definitely accessible. It's only short, but very, very haunting, harrowing, dark and disturbing tale, that is for sure.
Well, thank you so much. I think the topic of AI is just so fascinating, and there's only going to be like more inspiring things coming out on that topic, especially with like real life AI things like ChatGPT, Midjourney, like all of these things coming up, and the ethics of it is just so interesting too.
It's really interesting. There's all these kind of ongoing court cases where artists are trying to say that it's plagiarism because all these large language models have been trained on their books, and it's like, well, you're clearly plagiarizing our books. I suppose there's a counter argument that says, yeah, well, but we've all been trained on books. Like, that's how you learn and you produce art, isn't it? You kind of consume other people's stuff and then you're inspired by it. So yeah, all these precedents that need to be kind of figured out and worked through.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. I was talking to a lawyer, and they said about how copyright doesn't apply to like non-human entities. So just the idea that like if AI writes something, then technically you can't apply copyright to it because it's not human. I just thought that was so fascinating. And that she said about a lot of the topics that are coming up with AI, like it's stuff that doesn't have precedent, and that like a lot is going to have to be like determined later on. And I know Elon Musk does a lot about like, he's really pushing regulation on AI. And he's someone who I recently read his biography, and just like kind of like how he sees it so much of a threat to kind of like the way things are now, but like also is like welcoming to like how it can help us evolve and adapt is interesting. So kind of like I personally don't have like that much of a fear of AI, and I think maybe I'm a little crazy not to.
I'm sort of in your camp on this. I'm more excited by it than I am afraid of it, and I get the
Yeah.
impression I'm sort of surprised that I'm in a bit of a minority on that, I think. I should, before I forget, I should shamelessly plug the book I wrote called Auxiliary, which was a kind of science fiction thriller that was very much focused on, there is an AI character in that book called Tim, the imagination machine, Tim. And this is a kind of ubiquitous, almost like an evolution of a kind of ChatGPT, Alexa type, intelligence that everyone talks to all day. It's in the walls of every new home. It makes, runs your hot water for you, runs your shower, makes you tea, does everything. It's this kind of completely, worldwide sort of being, I guess, that exists to kind of help people. And of course, it becomes, embroiled in a murder, which I thought was a kind of interesting. So it becomes a kind of buddy cop story where you've got this kind of like hard-boiled detective whose partner, in effect, is this Tim kind of AI entity, which I thought was a fun idea. But so yeah, always been fascinated by that topic, that's for sure.
Yeah, shifting back to your books, you mentioned your upcoming fantasy novel, Scarred. What can you tell us about this book, and what inspired you to venture into fantasy?
What I would say, without going too spoilery, is it's although it is a fantasy novel, ostensibly, some of those themes may pop up in the book later. So yeah, watch out for that. It could be a bit sort of genre bending. But yeah, fantasy. I've always been a huge fan of that genre too. I've read, obviously Lord of the Rings is the really famous one. I read that when I was very young, and The Hobbit as well. Loved them, fantastic. Consumed a load of other stuff. I read Stephen Donaldson's The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, which I would recommend very highly. It's a 10-part series, so it takes a bit of doing. And I used to, do you remember those like choose your own adventure books? Then it was like turn to chapter 27 to slay the dragon and roll a dice. And I absolutely loved those as well. So again, just brought up on this diet really of kind of dark fantasy, creepy stuff. So I always wanted to have a crack at writing a kind of fantasy novel. This one is set in a sort of mysterious world where there's a little, I mean, it is literally an enclave called the Enclave, and it's a kind of crumbling castle with about 450 people in it. And if they go beyond the castle walls, they will catch this plague that's kind of swirling in the mist that surrounds them. So they dare not venture out. They're trapped in there. That's all they do. And they have a completely sort of pampered existence where their food supplies and everything they need is brought to them regularly by these strange creatures that visit the Enclave, until one day the creatures stop coming. And so suddenly you go from this sort of, society that doesn't really have to do anything for itself. It's pretty kind of dull kind of existence. Suddenly, panic, starvation, how does a society kind of cope with it? And in the end, we have a central character who's one of the kind of lowly sort of servants, basically called Freya, and she must venture out into the wastes. They basically sort of ruthlessly kick her out to, they don't care if she gets the plague, but they want her to go and try and find a solution to their problem. And needless to say, things are not quite as they seem. She meets some interesting characters on her quest, on her journey. And I was sort of, I think, got almost a bit of a Wizard of Oz kind of vibe. I've always liked, that kind of idea of a quest story, I guess, where it's a group of people, companions, and they have to physically walk a very, very long way and have adventures en route. So yeah, it was a real joy to write that, actually.
And that's coming out April 2024.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, no, it's done, edited. I would show you the cover if my sadly technology hadn't let me down and my camera hadn't broke halfway through the call. It's got a scary dragon on it who is sort of fragmenting into pixels one half of his face. So yes, take from that what you will. But yeah, the new publisher, I think they put a bit of time into that kind of promotion process for you. So it's, by the time it comes out, hopefully you've got it into a few bookstores and on people's radars. So yeah, exciting year ahead.
Well, I'm excited for you, and thank you so much for coming on my podcast today. It was such a pleasure, and I wish you so much success in your future.
Oh, thank you, Katie. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. Sorry again about the technical difficulties.
It's okay. There's so much value that people can learn from, and I think it's so important that they can really grow if they implement the things you're talking about, and if they decide to go and put to action what you're saying.
Yeah, no, hopefully people can take some tips. Again, there's probably just as many tips of things you shouldn't do that I do that are not the best habits. But sometimes it's good to be open about those as well, I think, because it is ultimately, I think it's about what works for you, finding what works for you as a writer or an artist. So no, hopefully that is of some use to your listeners. And although you can't see it, I assure you I am smiling broadly because I've had a great time. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think it's so important. If someone tells us the perfect writing routine to get everything done, there's so much pressure in that sometimes people can kind of be in paralysis from it, and they can feel like they're not going to be able to be productive if they don't do everything right. And I think it's just so realistic when people say that some of the things they do are things they don't recommend for other people, and that it's really in making mistakes that you're growing and putting in the work to get things out. And I think that's just something that's so realistic, and that's a message people need to hear.
No, fantastic. And it's exactly that. It's try different things, see what works for you, see what doesn't. I think I probably have stressed it. It's that there is a cutoff where you do have to write stuff. You have to be producing words. So you can't always let yourself off the hook. But certainly, you don't have to do 5,000 words a day, 2,000 words a day. Some people might do 50 words a day and take a lot longer to write their book. And that is totally fine as well, as long as you're making progress. You certainly don't have to be churning out sort of one every 6 months or anything like that. Some people take a decade to write a novel, and that's fantastic.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.